What an interesting story from Jesus this morning, don't you think? I don't know if you got a little bit nervous hearing about some of the things Jesus was saying about kids and how important they are in our world and how much they matter to Him. You don't want to go around the ocean if you've caused one of these little ones to stumble. Did you catch that? A millstone, a big rock, and you are just a goner. I mean, it's a pretty serious thing that Jesus was bringing up. But of course, it starts with a conversation where the disciples, sillily, I guess you'd say, are asking, who's the greatest? You know, they're having this whole big thing, and I don't know, that's probably not the conversation Jesus wanted to hear from His people, you know. And don't we all do that at certain times in history? You know, who's got the biggest this or the most important that or whatever it might be, the most money, I don't know. They're just all of these constant rating systems that just seem to be all around our world all the time. And in fact, back in that day, just like in today, people would wonder, you know, who's the greatest? Who's the most important person in the world? You know, is it the richest person? Is it the person, you know, it used to be like Bill Gates or Elon Musk, or maybe you think of it in the religious world, you know, whoever has the biggest church, you know, or Billy Graham, or I don't know what you might think of in terms of the greatness factor that would really just take it to the nth degree. And Jesus decided, rather than pointing to any of these kind of famous people or amazing leaders or whatever else you might use as a good example, He asks a little kid to come forward. And I love that when He asks the kid to come, the kid just comes coming. He just runs to him. You know, Jesus doesn't scare kids away. That's kind of a nice thing. Unlike a certain bearded guy in a red suit that my daughter was not interested in sitting on his lap at any time during the Christmas season. Did any of your kids not have a good experience with it? Yeah, it's a little terrifying sometimes, but not with Jesus. Jesus, the kids just come. Why? He's so welcoming. He knows the kids just get a sense, I think, that Jesus cares for them. Let the little children come to me, Jesus says. Do not hinder them. But then He starts to speak about how we need to become like children if we're going to experience the kingdom of God. Childlike, not childish. Let's just keep it keep it careful there. There is a difference, I would suppose, but when you're childlike, you're just looking at the world in a slightly different way. I mean, at some point, we get kind of cynical, don't we? We get a little burned out, maybe jaded, perhaps. We lose that sense of innocence, perhaps, or that childlike wonder and curiosity. You know, it's not, what is that old saying? You don't get old because you grow up because you get old. How's that go? Anyway, you know what I'm saying, that you're only as old as you feel. And some of us could use a little bit of an injection of some childlike faith, especially when it comes to our prayer life. Usually when we pray, we're praying about some very adult kind of level things, you know, big problems in the world or perhaps some needs in our own lives or the needs in the lives of people that we care for. Nothing wrong with that. Keep praying for all those things. Hope you're praying for all these crises around the world and people that don't have enough. And of course, people live in our own church. We constantly pray for them. So those are important things to keep praying for. But when you listen to how kids pray, they pray for different things, don't they? They don't always pray for the same kinds of experience. You just never know what's going to come out of the mouth of a child. You know, for years we would do little kids talks before we would dismiss the kids off to kids' church, and we'd always ask them questions. And, you know, if you're a lawyer in a courtroom, you never want to ask a question that you don't know the answer to. But when you're a pastor doing a kids' talk, all bets are off. You know, you are just doomed from the beginning because you never know. But of course, that's the precious thing about kids. They're precocious. They don't have any kind of filter, it would seem, and they just say whatever is on their mind. Again, I'm not sure that's something we want to adopt, but there's something about the approach that a child has in the world. I think that's something we need for our prayer life. We want to pray like dependent, naive, simple kids. You know that expression, KISS, keep it simple, stupid? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to call you stupid, but it's not, it's not keep it complicated, genius, right? It's keep it simple, stupid. And that's what we need to do when it comes to our prayer life. I love the story of an old man, elderly gentleman, distinguished, well put together. He walks into a toy store and he sees one of those Lionel trains, kind of just roaming around the store, and he's just got a little twinkle in his eye, and he says to the sales lady, he says, "Oh, I'd like one of those." And the lady says, "Oh, that'll be so great for your grandson." And he kind of looks at her, he says, "Oh, you know what, you're absolutely right, make it 2. And that's kind of how we need to be sometimes. We need to look with some wonder and some openness at the world. Jesus holds up children as just an amazing example of what faith should be like. He says, "Truly I tell you, unless you change and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." I remember Nicodemus had a similar conversation with Jesus, in that part of the Bible where we get John 3:16, "For God so loved the world," and all that. Well, that's all in a conversation with this famous old Pharisee who comes to Jesus at night because he's a little afraid about it. And he has this whole experience of talking about the kingdom. And he's like, "Well, what, do I have to go back into my mother's tummy? What is going on here? How are we going to pull this off?" And Jesus says, "No, you got to be born of the Spirit." He's saying a similar thing here. There's just a different dynamic when we're walking in the kingdom. We have a different attitude, perhaps, than when we're walking in the world. And so Jesus gives us this framework of childlike innocence, perhaps. He kind of clarifies it just as a little bit here. "Whoever becomes humble like this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me." And so the first part about being humble. Now, I am the humblest person I know, and so I can just know. That's the minute you talk about how humble you are, what's happened? You've blown it. You're no longer humble at all. But I don't think we're talking about that inner experience of being humble, though that could be in view here, like humility, like we would think of. I think what Jesus is getting at here is the kind of more old-timey use of the word humble, where we would say something like he came from humble beginnings or something, kind of small or unimportant. And you think, well, what do you mean? That's not the way we think of children today. Children are like little Buddhas, we have to treat them like royalty and give it to their every need. And well, I don't know if that's a good idea, but that just seemed, am I right? Does that seem to be the way parents are today? I don't know. I mean, it's pretty interesting how much children rule the world in some fashion when it comes to, I think once advertisers realized that children could make an impact on their buying decision of their parents, everything changed. When I was growing up, it wasn't too far from the children should be seen, not heard experience. I know that was certainly my parents and my grandparents. Did any of you grow up with that kind of deal? Like children did not have a lot of a pull in the world. They were in some ways slightly unimportant, maybe a little bit neglected at times because the important adults were discussing things in the room. So children kind of knew their place. And it was and that was certainly the way it was back in Jesus' day. They were humble, not because they were just so deeply spiritual and humility and all that. It was because they were thought of as unimportant. Now, not that kids didn't matter. They were, of course, a blessing from the Lord, but they were not high on the totem pole. They were at the bottom of the economic scale, the bottom of the contributions to the family business. What are they going to do? And so Jesus is giving us an image of something that, of someone who's really not that big a deal. And he's saying that's what you are shooting for when it comes to entering into the kingdom of heaven. And maybe that is part of it. Humility, we often say it's not thinking less of yourself. It's just thinking of yourself less often. That would be a nice thing where I'm not putting my priority as the top priority, but I'm putting others before me. That's a good way of being like a child, though that doesn't always happen with children. You rarely see two children talking and say, "Oh, no, you play with the toy first. Oh, no, you play with the toy first." That's not usually what I've experienced with kids. Have you? Usually it's like Lord of the Flies, It's kind of like, we'll see who comes out of this gladiatorial combat alive, and then that will be the toy winner and owner for the duration of the play date. And it's just a different world when it comes to kids. And yet there's something about this kind of childlike view of the world that we want to capture. And in a sense, we're in danger of losing it. Not only are we in danger of losing it for ourselves, we're in danger of losing it for the children that we're called to welcome. Jesus has this idea that when we welcome children, that we're actually welcoming him. And you'll get at this more specifically in other parts of the Bible. Matthew 25 is a big one. You remember when he's talking about the separation of the sheep from the goats, and all the people that we serve, whether it's people that are naked or hungry or in prison or just broken in all kinds of different ways. Jesus says, when you were doing that, guess what? You were actually doing it to me. And when you weren't doing it, guess what? You weren't doing it to me. And so every time we love those things that are considered somewhat insignificant or less important or kind of cast aside, marginalized, whatever you want to say, whenever we're in that vein, Jesus is saying, you're doing it to me. You give a cup of cold water. You meet a need. You just share good news with a kid. And in fact, Jesus puts this example so often, it just makes me think, boy, I don't want to miss what Jesus is saying. At one point, he's sending the disciples out on a mission trip, 2 by 2, to go to the towns where he was going to go. And he's saying, cast out demons and preach the good news. I mean, it's a pretty big assignment, And at one point, he says, you've got to be as innocent as doves and as sly or wise, whatever the word is, but I guess sly is the right word, as serpents. Innocent like a dove, sly like a serpent. That's the way this is going to happen. Well, it's an interesting view to think about when it comes to childlike faith, You got to have a little Slytherin in you. You got to have a little Gryffindor in you, I guess. That's just the way that it works when you're going on mission for the Lord. And yet some of us, we got a lot of, Slytherin perhaps, but do we have that innocence, that naivete, that kind of wonder and openness that children seem to display so well? I mean, this is not an unimportant matter for Jesus. And I sure would like to have more childlike faith. One of my favorite things about kids is that they really tell you what they're feeling. And of course, if kids get hurt or they have troubles or whatever, they can develop walls and defenses just like we do. Some kids grow up a little too soon because of terrible things that happen. But when you just kind of watch the trajectory of a healthy kid, and you just kind of, it's like whatever's on their mind is on their lips. That's just kind of the way that they are. And they have a sensitivity to what's going on in the room. We don't often give credit for the kind of emotional intelligence that children often have. They're not always just selfish little brats, right? Sometimes they're actually amazingly attuned. I'm just kidding. No kid is a selfish brat. Jesus said some pretty dangerous things. Don't be mean to kids. Hello, listen to this carefully. But what he does say is when they have this kind of or rather what I'm saying is they have this kind of attunement where they can sense in the room what's going on. Maybe some of you were like this as kids. Maybe it's not all kids, but some kids I've noticed. They can walk into a room and sense that there's something not quite right, either between their parents or maybe with some of their friends. They have a sensitivity. I heard one kid that went up to his dad and said, "Daddy, why are you mad?" And the dad, of course, said what we would all say, oh, I'm not mad. He says, no, your eyebrows are mad. They can tell, right? It's not something that just kind of isn't obvious. We might not even know the emotions that are roiling around inside of us, but kids, they can pick up on that. And Jesus is wary that we would mess up the lives of children. He says, if any of you put a stumbling block before one of these little ones who believe in me, it would be better for you if a great millstone were fastened around your neck and you were drowned in the depths of the sea. Now, this is somewhat terrifying when you think about this, and he goes on to talk about plucking out eyes or cutting off limbs. I mean, this is a big deal for Jesus. Usually, he's just given the blasts to the religious leaders who are all about the legalism instead of the relationship, the ones that are following all the minuscule rules, but then neglecting the weightier matters of the law. Here he's saying, if you are not caring for kids, it's a dangerous thing. I wonder how soon you can get the gospel into your heart. Does it happen when you're born? Does it happen when you're 1 or 2 or 3? The Catholics have a saying, you give us a kid for 5 years, we will have them for life. Some of you recovering Catholics are like, yeah, that's right. They got me. I know. I mean, it's true. You can do a lot in the first 5 years of a child's life. What happens psychologically or biologically? I mean, there's so much going on, so many things being imprinted in those moments of childhood where we learn what is safe, and what is dangerous, what love is like, and dare I say, even what God is like. Because God is a lot like your parents when they're firing on all cylinders. They're providing for you. They're nurturing you. They're caring for you. They're making sure that you stay on the right path instead of getting off into the weeds. I mean, it's incredible what can happen in these early years of childhood. Now, of course, you guys know we've been considering opening up a children's center around St. John's. We're going to have a little forum today after worship to hear some of those details. Is it a good idea financially? Is it dangerous? Is it smart? Is it good for the community? Is it good for the church? Is it good? All those kind of questions just kind of bubble up inside me whenever I've thought about that or wondered about that. But boy, I tell you what, when I get around a whole bunch of little kids just running around, there's something fun about that. There's something that just brings up joy in me. Not just so we can make a little extra money as a church. That would be a disaster if that's all we were looking for, is just a kind of a financial thing, though hopefully down the line that will be the case. There is a little way to get some resource out of a business like that as a ministry of the church. But more significantly, I like to think about, what about those families that might come to St. John's? That statistics would tell us anyone under the age of 30, the odds of you being in church are getting less and less and less and less. In fact, the statistics are so bad, it's not that you just don't go to church, it's as if you never went to church. Many of you grew up in the church, maybe you went away for a while, or maybe you have kids that strayed a bit and then they're considering coming back. So many people, young families in our culture, they have exactly zero connection with church. They never went as a kid. They never dabbled in it as a teenager. They didn't go to youth groups or camps. They never gave their life to Jesus at a winter camp up at Hume Lake. None of that. It's like, going to a museum is how they think of it. Why would anyone go to a church on Sunday morning? All they want is your money, or all they want is a bunch of political stuff, or they just have so many misinformed views of what the people of God are like. They're not all wrong. We can be hypocritical as anyone time and time again. But nonetheless, at the core of this family of faith, think of how we could offer to young families who don't know anything about Jesus, way beyond just, babysitting. Oh my goodness, I don't want to be a babysitter. Did any of you grow up being a babysitter? It pays the bills, I guess. That's fine. If you got to do it, you got to do it. But I tell you what, I'm not really interested in that, but I am interested in Jesus' idea that we could actually not just not cause these little ones to stumble, but actually fill them with faith. Fill their families with a sense of wholeness that might be missing. Give them an extended family of community. Think of how many grandparents we have in this church, and you've got kids all over the country. Maybe they're not living right here with you. Well, what if we gave you some kids or some grandkids to mentor and love? If we had some parenting class, I don't know. The sky's the limit with some of this stuff, and maybe this isn't the right time for St. John's. I don't know. We'll have to talk about it. But to me, the idea that we could just have such an impact on a demographic that we don't seem to be reaching particularly well right now. It feels like we'd be right in tune with not just not causing them to stumble, but actually bringing them closer to faith. He says this, take care that you do not despise one of these little ones. For I tell you, in heaven, their angels continually see the face of my Father, which is one of the strangest verses in the Bible. I think this is the only time we get mention of this, but it's where the tradition of guardian angels have come up. Did you feel like you had a guardian angel in your childhood? For some of you, just the fact that you're still alive proves that you had a guardian angel or a SEAL Team 6 full of guardian angels, that were protecting you at many, many turns. I think of the many fences I've climbed or the buildings I've been on top of, and I think, God, I can't believe that I'm still here in the flesh, So there must have been some kind of angelic protection that was going on. But the idea that not just kids have angels, but that everyone has some protection, I just love that idea. I mean, of course, kids experience bad things, and so it's not like it always works. But the idea that these ministering servants would take care of children, to me, that's just a beautiful image. And right after this passage that we're talking about today, Jesus talks about the lost sheep. When you got 100 sheep and you lose one of them, what do? Well, you just say, I guess that's just business. We lost one. We got 99. That's still pretty good. It's still an A+, right? That's not what Jesus says. Instead, he says the shepherd leaves behind the 99 and goes after the one. We become kind of like angels in that sense, where we find kids that need to know Jesus. Not just little kids, but all kids. We've been having such a strange phenomenon at our 11 o'clock worship. It's super traditional. It's like, robes and chanting and old hymns and all that stuff. And I love that. And of course, I love this. I get the best of both worlds. You should be like me. Come to church twice. That would be great. But it's at the, and what's funny about that service is right in the back row over here, there's like 6 or 8 young men in their senior year of high school that are there every single Sunday. And it's because Lydia and Matthew, they do the youth group at noon. And so for whatever reason, a lot of these guys have been coming with Micah a little bit early to experience me as Friar Tuck. It really is a great look. And we know that's what's really drawing them in is my robes. They hear here because they love hearing the gospel, and they love the sense of family. And Frank Drake, one of our older members, he goes up to them every week, or Jeff goes up to them every week and greets them and loves them and thanks them for coming. Why? Because this is what we do as a church. We don't keep the good news to ourselves, but we want to make sure we're sharing it with as many folks as possible. And of course, that's never clear in my mind. And when we come to Jesus' table,